Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 7th of September 2024. And there is a ton of information again today. This is what happens generally around Ramstein meetings where the Ukraine Defense Contact Group meet 50 allies, get together and discuss what stuff they can give to Ukraine. And then you have several days of immense amounts of information coming out regarding what different allies are doing to help Ukraine, as well as all these other bubbling issues to do with lifting restrictions and whatnot that's ongoing at the moment. So I did a very long video this morning. This will, or not this morning, this afternoon, this will be a fairly chunky military aid video. So sorry, not sorry, it's what it is. We're going to start with a very important point because we're going to be talking initially about restrictions lifting, because Zelensky has been very forward about desiring the US to lift restrictions on Western weaponry use deep inside Russia. Now, the context of the US decision to not lift restrictions is one of anti-escalation. And though they talk about Russia having already moved 90% of their aircraft, and though they talk about not having enough ATACMS missiles to do significant damage, those arguments are poor. There are many targets still within ATACMS range that aren't just airfields, and even hitting the 10% of what's left is going to be really, really important. The third component is the anti-escalation one, and that is really what's going on here. Now, why are the US so afraid of these red lines being crossed and Russia actually doing something about it? Because these red lines have been crossed consistently over the course of the war and nothing has happened. Now, apparently there's news coming out that CIA Director William Burns has been speaking with, in a historic moment, I think, with the UK Head of Intelligence. They've been saying some things today in London. I think it's today. And one of the things that's come out is that in the autumn of 2022, there had been a genuine risk. So the US had genuinely believed that Russia were potentially going to use tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine. But Bill Burns cautions against being intimidated by saber rattling. So on the one hand, he says, we genuinely thought there was going to be nuclear usage or potentially nuclear usage in autumn 2022. But on the other hand, we shouldn't be afraid and kept from acting on account of being afraid of the use of nuclear weapons. So Oliver Carroll from The Economist says, this was around the time of the Kharkiv counteroffensive. A Ukrainian security source told me Russians have posited 3 possible uses, included against Ukrainian forces in the breakout area. A combination of Chinese pressure and lack of clear military value stopped the idea in its tracks. So remember, China has been a really big veto element on the Russians using nuclear weaponry. There are several reasons for this. One, obviously, mutually assured destruction. You don't want the world to die. So China, like everyone else, is going to be interested in there not being a nuclear war on Earth. Second element is going to be nuclear fallout moving across Chinese territory through the winds going eastwards. Third element could possibly be that they have supposedly bought or are renting 50, or not renting, but lease of 15% of Ukrainian agricultural land. And this is part of their policy of going around the world and buying up land in order to assure that they can have food for their massive population of 1 billion people. Right, so land is really important to them. Agricultural land is really important to them. They need food security. Now, as a breadbasket of the world, or one of the breadbaskets of the world, Ukraine's food output is massively important for everyone, but also for China. Even if that food is actually directed towards other places around the world, it affects the global marketplace. So if you take all of Ukraine's food out of the calculation, then that's going to shove up food prices all around the world, which will affect China because they need to feed 1 billion people. So when it comes to Ukraine's land being potentially massively contaminated by nuclear waste or nuclear war, then that is going to affect China. They have an investment in Ukrainian land, and they have an investment in land around the world and food security for their own population. So they are, whenever China talks about the war, whenever they sort of side with Ukraine, or whenever they're trying to keep Russia in check, it is always about the nuclear thing. So that's why where they're really strong. So it could be that China said, and if you remember, there have been a couple of points where they've been very strong in public about Russia not using nuclear weapons, and this might have been one of those moments. So they might have stopped Russia from doing this, and this could have been a moment of real worry that is keeping the US. Maybe they have more knowledge of this situation than any other country on earth. So when someone like Estonia says, hey, we're okay with Ukraine using Western weapons into Russia, then maybe not in the know concerning what has taken place previously, and the US are. And the US are like, okay, we were that close to nuclear weapons being used. This is a lot of supposition from me here, but potentially it could be the scenario where they're saying we were that close to nuclear, not holocaust, nuclear usage at this point, that we are going to be super cautious in a way that other nations aren't. You know, at the end of the day, Estonia isn't a big nuclear nation, right? It's not a nuclear nation, so they don't have a horse in that race. The US, if nukes are going to be thrown around, the US is going to be involved in that directly. You know, not Italy, for example. There are two nuclear nations in Europe, UK and France. Okay, so a lot of these nations saying, yeah, we're fine with you using these weapons into Russia, aren't the ones that are going to be right in the middle of a nuclear war. Now, I've been really strong on the US allowing Ukraine to use nuclear missiles, right? But I also do understand what the rationale is. And if you get it wrong, that's a really big risk. You get it wrong and there's a nuclear war. You get it right, Russia does nothing. You allow Ukraine to use ATACMS 300 kilometers into Russia, and Russia saber rattles but does nothing. Okay, brilliant. You get it wrong, we're all dead, right? So that, I mean, of course, Russia knows this, and so they can use that to keep people like the US from lifting restrictions. There's a lot of leverage they have there, but I do understand it. Now, Oliver Carroll says, for the sake of clarity, this tweet is the account of senior Ukrainian source given to me several months ago. Others have written to me from the US military expert community to argue the above might not be accurate, so that also might not be the case. The Ukrainians would not have access to the intel, they argue. So, yeah, and there are other people. So John Ridge said, if the Americans genuinely believe this, then they're on the source type thing. So there are lots of ideas floating around here, but one option to explain people like Jake Sullivan's reluctance to budge is the very real, perhaps almost too real threat of nuclear war. Right. Now, Zelensky, on lifting restrictions on strikes against Russia, says that there is no consensus yet. Quote, there's no consensus yet, but I remember working on the use of appropriate weapons on the territory of temporarily occupied Crimea. There was no consensus then either, but it's important to find the key to at least one country and then others can catch up, he said. Now, what we have, before we come to those elements, we have Finland and Estonia have said that Ukraine should be allowed to attack targets in Russia and with Western weapons. Quote, it aligns with both our values and interests that Ukraine wins this war and achieves a just and sustainable peace, said Finnish President Alexander Stubb. We have the French Defense Minister Sébastien Lecornu saying, I did not, this is French aid to Ukraine saying, I do not think Sébastien Lecornu cares anymore about what the Ukrainian armed forces do with French supplied weapons, as long as they hit military targets and other strategic targets that are not civilians. So he has said here, and I'll just read you out the subtitles of his claim. Defensive weapons So it's always been a bit vague there, because the idea of the defensive weapon, you know, if I take this thing and I throw it in somebody's face, it's not a weapon, but it becomes an offensive weapon. And he's actually absolutely right. That I've long said, and you've heard me say this before, the idea of defensive weapons against offensive weapons is a false distinction. Every weapon that Ukraine uses and every move, including invading Russia, is a defensive move. The invasion of Kursk is a defensive maneuver. They are defending their country, and they're trying to stop Russia from continuing the invasion of theirs, the Russian offensive. And all of these things, so firing ATACMS in 300 kilometers into Russia, firing drones 1,800 kilometers into Russia is a defensive move. But of course, some people don't see that and say, oh, that's offensive. No, like, we wouldn't be doing it. Well, this is our way of defending ourselves. Like, if I am in a fight with someone who's attacking me and punching my face in, I can just hold my fists up here, right? And just block and just be entirely defensive in that sense. But there's also a way of defending myself by hitting back. This is self-defense. And in the court of law, you know, you are hitting in self-defense, trying to win a fight so this person doesn't kick me in. Because if I just do this, I will eventually lose. If I just do this and cover my face, the guy is going to kick and hit me until I can't cover my face, until all my ribs are broken. Right? So at some point, I need to think, right, how do I stop this person from hitting me? I need to hit them. That is, you might think is offensive. I would argue it's defensive, because I wouldn't be hitting them had they not be trying to attack me. So the idea of defensive versus offensive weapons is, in my opinion, a false distinction in this context. Right, okay. Now let's go and have a look at what Lloyd Austin has said. So Colby Babwai here saying, the question is, there are other strategic targets inside Russia, aside from air bases, within range that could be taken out. This idea that, well, they've moved 90% of their aircraft, so we're not going to give them ATACMS to shoot into Russia. Yeah, it's not all about air bases. Answer, there's a lot of capability that Ukraine has, drones and other things to address those targets. In other words, we don't want them to use US weaponry, we want them to use their own weaponry. Lloyd Austin struggles to find defense for Biden's cowardice in forbidding Ukraine from hitting Russian territory, says Jay in Kiev, who's super angry about this. Settles on making the case that Ukraine can take down the Russian Air Force with cheap plastic drones. Okay, so let's listen to him in his own words.
And Mr. Secretary, I have to go back. President Zelensky has repeatedly requested for these long-range attacks inside Russia. Even allies agree. So what is stopping the United States from giving the go-ahead?
Again, I don't believe what is stopping the United States. I don't believe one specific capability will be decisive, and you know, I stand by that comment. I think Ukraine has a pretty significant capability of its own to address targets that are well beyond the range of ATACMS or even Storm Shadow, for that matter. And as we look at the battlefield currently, we know that the Russians have actually moved their aircraft that are using the glide bombers beyond the range of ATACMS. So this is an interesting argument, but again,
it's an interesting argument that's only there because you didn't allow them to shoot them while those aircraft were still in place.
Yeah, and I think, you know, for the foreseeable future, we're going to make sure that we remain focused on helping them do those things that are enable them to be effective in defending their sovereign territory.
Mr. President, excuse me, Mr. Secretary, President Zelensky and others have said that there are other strategic targets inside Russia within range that could be effectively taken out with these long-range weapons.
There are a lot of targets in Russia, big country, obviously, and there's a lot of capability that Ukraine has in terms of UAVs and other things to address those targets.
And there you go. I'm unconvinced. US Defense Secretary says Ukraine's long-range strikes would not impact the war. His comments ignore how weapon systems and their engagement do affect Ukrainian capabilities and the course of the war, according to the Institute for the Study of War, American military think tank. And I'd agree, like, I think they're trying to come up with as many excuses as possible not to allow Ukraine to use Western weapons to attack deep inside Russia from purely an anti-escalation point of view. And that's not to say I don't understand. And as I've said already, I understand why. And if you've got an experience of that saber being rattled to the point where it's not just being rattled, but it might actually be used, then you might be a little bit reluctant, more so than other countries, to allow Ukraine to do X, Y, and Z. Now, moving on. So US, as a result of Ramstein, has given a whole bunch of stuff, supposedly, or has pledged a whole bunch of equipment as part of the upcoming $250 million package, including, it was kind of emerging yesterday, so we are hearing that 32 coastal and river patrol boats have been promised. They could look something like that. The US is to transfer 200 M113 armored personnel carriers. That's excellent. These are becoming obsolete in the US. I mean, they still do use them here and there, but there's a lot of scope for more M113s, and actually these are pretty decent workhorses. Yes, they're old, but in terms of getting people from A to B, doing some Kazovacs or whatever, these are still really useful. Then we're hearing maybe Bradleys as well, M113s, RIM-7 missiles for air defense. So these are the anti-aircraft from a ship missile that have been rejigged, or at least a system to be rejigged for the Franken-SAM systems, so that these old book launchers can fire the RIM-7s. So more of them. Ammunition for HIMARS. I was just watching a montage of HIMARS taking out a whole host of Russian artillery pieces in the Prokrovsk area. So HIMARS are being used quite a bit at the moment. Again, 155mm and 105mm artillery ammunition. Well, actually, Euromaidan Press has usefully actually just given this list, finally found one. So RIM-7 missiles and support for air defense, Stinger missiles for the MANPADS, man portable air defense systems, the shoulder mounted ones, but also Stingers are used in the Avengers, which are Humvees with those mounted on the back. Ammunition for HIMARS, 155mm and 105mm artillery ammunition, tow missiles for Bradleys, Javelin and 84 anti-armor systems, so those are anti-tank guided missiles, again shoulder launch. Bradley infantry fighting vehicles. I've been saying now for weeks that you are going to see a package with Bradleys, and then they keep not giving them, and I'm like, no, I'm sure they're coming, and here they are. And there is an argument to say, because someone was telling me recently that actually they're already been on the way. So sometimes with these packages, they are actually kind of post hoc announcements of things that we've already got there. So it'd be great if the Bradleys are already there. M113 armored personnel carriers, mine resistant ambush protection vehicles, so MRAP, so things like Max Pros, small arms ammunition and grenades, patrol boats, maritime training equipment, demolition equipment and munitions, and spare parts, ancillary equipment, service, training and transportation. So that's a fairly substantial list of equipment. We are now starting to see some new consignments of vehicles, which is, I think, needed and good news for the Ukrainians. Ramstein Air Base in Germany, says Alexander Kamishin, who now is advising, it seems, Zelensky and his team on strategic industries, etc., etc. Ramstein Air Base, Ukraine Defense Contact Group meeting. Together with my president, I spoke to partner nations, ministers of defense, engaged them in buying more from Ukrainian defense industry. This is super important, something that we are seeing more and more of. So Denmark, for example, has been big on investing in, or not investing in, helping Ukraine, not so much with giving them their own weaponry or putting orders into their own defense industry, but actually putting orders into the Ukrainian defense industry. Commission has said, and I've told you a million times, that there was a $10 billion shortfall for the Ukraine defense industry. They could have built much more stuff. They could have manufactured a whole load more equipment over the last year. They just didn't have the money. So if other nations, ideally for nations, you want to invest in your own industry, but if you don't have the industry that can handle that, then you invest, the next best thing is instead, so if you're Denmark, I could invest in Danish industry, or I can invest in other industries to get stuff to Ukraine. But actually, it's better to invest in Ukrainian industry to get stuff to Ukraine if that is you're trying to work out what they need and what the best thing for them is. But if they can produce good stuff, then it's better that I spend that in Ukraine rather than France, right? Ukraine, spending that money in Ukraine the money is multiplied. So that money will go into supply industries and sandwich makers and people's pockets, and they can go out to the pubs and buy their missus an extra present, and that money goes around that society, that community, those locations, and is multiplied, and that's really good for Ukraine. So if you're trying to help Ukraine, you can help them both in defense and in their economy and their tax revenues, which then they can reinvest in defense. And so it's much better to do that. I mean, essentially, if you're just thinking about Ukraine rather than Denmark for this example, if you're just thinking about Ukraine, you want to invest in Ukraine. The best thing for Ukraine to win the war is Ukraine to produce their own stuff to win the war. But actually, that's not possible. Sometimes the things like Patriot, they're not going to be producing Patriot systems. So sometimes you need to invest in other countries to get that stuff there. But from your own country's point of view, the best thing is to invest in your own economy from a kind of selfish point of view. But as long as you're supporting Ukraine with that. Okay, so comments from the Secretary of Defense Austin at the 24th Ukraine Defense Contact Group today, says John Ridge. A R-27 substitute, so that's the air-to-air missile that we heard about yesterday, that the Americans are looking at creating a better air-to-air missile that will fit on Soviet-era planes. So at the moment, the Sukhoi planes and the MiGs that the Ukrainians are using have worse radars than the Russian versions, and they have worse missiles than the Russian versions that don't go as far. And that needs to change. You can provide them with Western planes with better weaponry, or you can update somehow the Soviet-era weaponry and planes. So an R-27 substitute would sustain Ukraine's legacy Fulcrums and flankers in a cruise missile defense mission and possibly supplement R-27 in surface launch applications. I'm unsure if the $200 million for drones and emitter components is drawn from USAI or FMF funds. So he's talking about what help the US is also giving Ukraine here. So outside of that package, for its long-term security, this is a quote from, I don't know where this is from actually. But yeah, for its long-term security, Ukraine must continue to boost its own defense production, and many contact group members are already supporting that effort. Just as I was saying just weeks ago, Denmark committed, yeah, there you go, some of its latest $115 million security assistance package to buying arms from Ukraine's industry, the defense industry. Meanwhile, with help from several European countries, the US is working with Ukraine to design and build substitute for the S-300 surface-to-air missile system, so I talked about this yesterday, and the R-27 air-to-air missile. The US has also allocated more than $200 million to purchase critical components to let Ukraine produce the drones and electronic warfare systems that it has deployed so effectively. So this might also include drones that can strike deep into Russia. So rather than the US saying you can use ATACMS to strike Russia, it could be saying, here's $200 million and some components to build your own drones. Here's like a Lego set. You build the Lego model. We're not going to give you our Lego models, but we're going to give you some Lego pieces and a load of money, and you can buy your own Lego pieces and build the model yourself. And then you can go and use that as you like. So this could be their way around that, so that they can deploy them effectively. Our national armaments directors are working in lockstep with the capability coalitions to meet these needs and speed up delivery. So I look forward to discussing ways to strengthen Ukraine's defence industrial base as well as all of our own. I presume that's actually the words from Lloyd Austin. So John Ridge doesn't know where that 200 mil comes from, but it will come from one of the appropriations pots. And then he goes on to talk about other things to do with S-300s inheriting 44 S-300P fire units, 3,500 to 4,000 reloads, blah, 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 blah. You can go in and read that. Go and find John Ridge's thread on the situation with the S-300s. Okay. US and Ukraine collaborate on developing alternatives to Soviet-era air defense systems. So as that's then being reported separately in lots of places, that is quite, I think, significant. But it also works with other systems. So I've already mentioned the book surface-to-air missile system that has been rejigged to allow it to fire these RIM-7 missiles, and they're getting a bunch of those in this package, as they often do. Here we have an upgraded Ukrainian Strela 10. So this is a short-range air defense system, kind of like maybe the Avenger Humvee with a bunch of man-pads on the back. except they're not man pads then, they're Humvee pads. Strela 10 here, the air defense system has new optical electronic sights. So updating these systems will help Ukraine big time, as they'll have old Soviet legacy equipment that can be performing to the levels they need. Right, in terms of munitions production in the US, Colby Badwar has a new fact sheet, or he's talking about the fact sheet on the UDCG's National Armaments Directors meeting from them. It's got a lot of information, so we're just going to look at some of this. US 155mm production has now reached 40,000 a month. Remember, it was 14,000. It's now over 1,000 a day. So that's really good in terms of being able to make 155mm ammunition predominantly for the US, for Ukraine. Unclear if this is from the partial operationalization of the first new line at GDOTS Mesquite, or an increase from another site, NEPA. The US will increase that further to 55,000 in the next month or so. Wow. And remember, they're aiming for 80,000. They say this by the end of the year per ASA Doug Bush. So that's amazing. By the end of 2024, because it was, I think, 80,000 was what they're aiming for. And that was going to be sometime in 2025, I thought. So, wow. 155mm MACS production is 18,000 per month. This is considerably less than I expected. I'm not sure what MACS is. Anyway, let's move on to GMLRS, guided multiple launch rocket system. So production is 1,167 per month, which is 4,000 a year. Per the P1, this was scheduled for next year, but it was previously reported they would achieve it this year. So again, ahead of the game. So these are all the things that the US is doing, and they're doing really well, and they are ahead of the game, or just ramping up production significantly. Those packages that Ukraine receive on a regular basis that allow them to just keep doing this war, like all of that ammunition that's coming in. Yeah, it might not be full of Bradleys and boats and this and that, but actually they can't do the war without this stuff, and the US is coming up with the goods, quite literally. Javelin production is 200 a month. That's 2,400 a year. This is an increase over very recently reported 2,100 a year. So that's 300 a year up. There's almost one extra a day. AIM 9X Sidewinder production. So they use these. These are for airplanes, for shooting down other airplanes, or you can put them in NASAM's air defense system to shoot them at airplanes from the ground. Obviously, they won't have as great a range because you have to overcome gravity to get them up into the air. Whereas if you're already zooming along at a massive pace and fire them out, then you've already got that speed and momentum, yada, yada, yada. But anyway, they use these as well for SAM systems. So Raytheon is on contract for 2,500 a year by 2025 from a previous baseline of 1,400. So they've made some modest progress. PAC-3 MSE production. So these are the missiles for the PAC-3 Patriot systems to shoot down ballistic missiles as well as cruise missiles. 42 a month. 504 a year. Lockheed has previously stated that they have already reached 550. So this needs further clarification. So in other words, the document he's looking at actually undercounts what Lockheed has already said that they are producing PAC-3 MSEs at. HIMARS production of 8 per month of 96 per year. As I previously shared, this was already 1 year ahead of schedule, expected end of year 2024 rather than the initial date of end of year 2025, and they have beaten that further. So I presume that the HIMARS, not the missiles, they're not making 8 a month, they are making 8 HIMARS vehicles, launchers. So they are ahead of the game with that. M776 barrel for the M777 howitzer. Production of 18 per month, which is 216 a year. I don't recall seeing any data on this recently. So they are really producing a lot of stuff, and most of that is going to be finding its way to Ukraine, no doubt. Right. Okay. I'm going to lose my voice soon. So Canada, as a result of the Ramstein meeting, is to transfer 29 M113. So the US giving 200, Canada giving another 29. That's going to be super helpful. And 64 Coyote LAVs. So these are armored vehicles that have guns on them as well. So basically infantry fighting vehicles of sorts to Ukraine. That is really useful as well. So 64 of them. Thank you, Canada. And as mentioned, they're already going to provide Ukraine with 80,000 CRV rocket motors. So these are the CRV-7. These are the old rockets they used to shoot out of. I think you could shoot them from helicopters. Different ways of firing these rockets. They were unguided rockets, but had at the time when they were made, did they not have the longest range or something? Anyway, of that sort. So they're sending those rocket motors and 1,300 warheads. According to the country's Defence Minister Bill Blair. Additionally, they'll send those vehicles as already mentioned and a small quantity of small arms too. And Canada has announced this week a group of Ukrainian pilots has arrived in Canada to undergo training on F-16 fighter jets. So that's really useful too. Moving on from Canada, we have Spain is immediately sending another complete Hawk medium-range SAM battery. So that's equipped with 6 launching units. So 6 units to fire surface-to-air missiles. The Hawk that have been successful in taking down certainly drones like the Shahed drones. These are pretty big missiles. They've been around since the 60s, prior to the Vietnam War, and they've been updated, but that's really useful. What else was I going to add to this? It was, yeah, they've also joined, Spain that is, have joined the IT and maritime support coalitions. So you have these coalition groups that have the expertise from all these different countries that want to opt into different groups depending on their speciality. And Spain has opted into the IT and the maritime support coalition. Because remember, this isn't about, this is not charity. This will be a positive sum game situation where, for example, Spain says, we're going to opt in to help with the IT and maritime, but they'll actually be taking expertise from that or being in a coalition that will help them in their own defence, Spain's own defence, going forward. So they'll be in a better position to, in terms of cyber warfare and cyber defence and maritime defence as well, by being a part of these coalitions. So this is about alliances to make Ukraine get to a better position whilst also benefiting yourself as a member of the coalition. The Netherlands allocates €80 million, in an aid package to Ukraine. It will include a large batch of F-16 parts and maintenance equipment, ramps, specialised tools, and air-to-air missiles. And that's from Ruben Breckelmans. The aid will include also generators and so on and so forth. So good stuff from the Dutch there. And here we have an infographic that I've translated over here. So as you can see from the No Reports caption, the Ukrainian Minister of Defense Umerov announced that Ukraine, along with allies, is forming a coalition focused on maritime capabilities. The infographic summarizes the outcomes of the 24th meeting of the Ramstein. So some of this you already know from what I've said, but just to translate from Umerov, $250 million aid package, including N2 Bradley combat vehicles, packages for HIMARS, a $389 million package, that's from Canada, over 5 years though, training F-16 pilots, engines for aviation missiles, and 1,300 warheads, thousands of machine guns, and pistols, 50 fast, 25 Damuel X premium, I don't know what, some kind of weird Google Translate doing something weird there. 162 million pounds, so that'd be about near enough $200 million from the UK. Aid package including 650 light multi-purpose missiles, the LMMs and the Martlet, that they can use in manpads, and also similar to basically the Stinger in many ways. We have an €80 million package from the Netherlands for air-to-air missiles, F-16, whatnots. We've got €5 million from Sweden for the participation in Mine Coalition, the Mine Clearance Coalition, and we have Spain giving those 6 Hawk launchers and being in the Maritime Capability Coalition. Basic provisions signed. That's with the Great Britain and Norway Maritime Coalition to maintain security in the Black Sea. So it's pretty much just summing up what we'd already heard. Ukraine's not asking for anything more than you already have, says Zelensky in Italy. Now, he is presently probably not there actually presently, because he goes to a country and then another country in the same day. But he was in Italy this morning with Giorgia Meloni, meeting her, and has said that, look, we're not asking for anything you don't already have. Just Ukraine is grateful for air defences provided by its partners, but they are still not enough to secure our entire territory and repel every Russian attack, he said during his visit to Meloni. Now, the EU, this is massive. The EU will allocate 300 million euros from frozen Russian assets to France for supplying weapons to Ukraine, to the French MOD. This is part of a larger 1.4 billion euro EU initiative aimed at quickly acquiring ammo, artillery and air defense systems. So it looks like, the way I would understand this, I haven't read this, but it looks like France will be given that money in order to spend that on behalf of Ukraine, quickly getting ammo, artillery and air defense systems to Ukraine. Now, actually, on that note, it's worth probably saying that France and Sweden, according to French Aid to Ukraine, going to defense.gov, France and Sweden will double the capacity of ammunition and explosives loading by 2025, double capacity of modular charges by 26, and increase powder production tenfold by 2026 as well. So this is an example of, just like we've heard from the US, there's another example of ramping up production capacities in order to provide, hopefully, ammunition quickly for Ukraine. So good news there. Now, head of Ukraine's intelligence directorate, Kyrylo Budanov, stated that new drone systems developed by top experts, including those from the GUR, now have the capability to strike military targets within Russia at distances of up to 1,800 kilometers. That's an absolutely massive distance, and that range means that they can hit so many more targets, and that will cause Russia to start panicking and think about moving air defense systems to potential targets that they previously had thought were safe. And of course, even if they don't use those munitions to strike 1,800 kilometers, the Russians won't know that. They don't know where they're going to be striking, and so it keeps the Russians guessing. Right, Foxtac unmanned logistics and evacuation transporters will be supplied to the Ukrainian army. The Ukrainian-made robotic platform has a height that doesn't exceed 40 centimeters. The control is carried out both remotely and with the help of a wired remote control. So I guess a person on board could also control it themselves if they need, or someone walking alongside. So yeah, useful stuff. There are lots and lots of examples of the evolution of UGVs at the moment, unmanned ground vehicles, and that's just another one. Ukrainian T-64BV here, with a chap sitting on the front, a Ukrainian with a 125mm high explosive shell, and it is an Indian shell. This is significant because we are seeing more evidence that probably the Czech initiative of getting artillery ammunition from all around the world and getting that to Ukraine has probably dipped into large Indian stores of Soviet-era artillery ammunition and tank ammunition. Right, I've talked about that already. Finally, here on the Russian side of things, I'm seeing more and more Africans on the Russian side, says PS01. A multipolar world loved by the Russophiles. This is true. Like, I am seeing videos with lots of Russian mercenaries, so African mercenaries, fighting on behalf of Russia. And indeed, people from all over, Sri Lankans and this and that, and basically Uncle John Cobley and all, appears to be they appear to be fighting for Russia. And of course the question is that what you expect if Russia were in a good position? Would they be doing that if they weren't so desperate? Is this a sign of desperation, or is it very clever for them to do that because they won't have to pay compensation to the families of these people? There won't be an issue, there won't be a PR issue, those body bags won't be going back to Russia, there won't be funerals, there won't be upset families. So you could argue that it's a sign of desperation, but you could also argue it's a pretty sound investment as well. Okay. Now on to the final thing here. Sorry, I told you it's long, and I hope you're still with me. My voice is going to go. I need a cup of tea. Right, we're now going to go on to Iranian ballistic missiles. So the US and European officials have told the Wall Street Journal that Iran has transferred ballistic missiles to Russia. Their response, a sanctions package, says Colby Badbois. Yeah, I'm sure that will teach them a lesson. After the North Korean missile transfer, I warned that this would happen if we didn't respond strongly, and here we are. I agree with Colby Badbois 100% here. So we did nothing to North Korean missiles going to Russia and landing in Ukraine. We had Pavlohrad yesterday hit with 5 KN-23 North Korean missiles. And what we've done to North Korea? Nothing. There's no answer. Like I said yesterday, we should be applying red lines to Russia. We should be saying, if you use North Korean missiles or if you use Iranian missiles into Ukraine, we will allow the Ukrainians to use ATACMS and Storm Shadows to shoot into Russia. We're drawing a red line for you, rather than just randomly allowing Ukraine to fire 300 kilometers into Russia and then Russia saying, well, that's it, we're going to use nukes now. You very clearly say, look, they won't use these weapons into Russia. The Ukrainians will not use ATACMS to hit that airbase unless you use North Korean and Iranian missiles. And if you do that, that's on you then. You're the one that escalated this, not us. We laid the red lines down for you and you stepped over them. But instead, we don't do that. We just allow Russia to set the red lines and then we go, oh, we better not do this. Absolutely ridiculous. So anyway, the Wall Street Journal has done a piece about the US tells allies Iran has already sent ballistic missiles to Russia. European officials say Europe and the US are working on a sanctions response to Iran's move. Well, yeah, Iran has already delivered those missiles and possibly Iran has supplied Russia with 200 Fateh 300, so 200 of those missiles, ballistic missiles, short-range ballistic missiles of ranges of up to 112 kilometers. So that's still significant. You can still hit things in the rear fairly successfully, and that's according to the Times there, and not the Wall Street Journal. So, bit of addition that in putting some numbers on the missiles. This significantly enhances Russia's capability to strike Ukraine and may pave the way for supplying missiles with a longer range. So this is mission creep. You know, first it was drones. Oh, you do nothing. Then it was missiles. Oh, okay, few sanctions. Then it's like longer range missiles, and then suddenly you've got essentially just a big military coalition of Iran, North Korea, Russia, and then, hey, China, you get on board because you've seen that we're not strong enough in answering back to when these things have happened. So I think we are being weak. So going back to, I understand why the US has decided not to allow Ukraine to strike deep into Russia. I think it's the wrong decision, though, and they should, and we should be very strong on this. Russia paid Iran with fighter jets, apparently, and technology to receive those ballistic missiles, according to the Institute for the Study of War. So this arms deal signifies a deepening strategic partnership, which is just what it's saying, between Tehran and Moscow as the two authoritarian regimes align. So that's what they're getting back. In fact, we did see Iran receive some jets before, and I think, did they not also receive an S-300 system? I'm thinking, what the hell are Russia doing? What the hell are they doing exporting these goods to Iran when they desperately need S-300 systems? And of course, they need even more than an S-300 system. They would want ballistic missiles and more Shahed drones. So it's about what's most important at the moment, this or that, and they've gone for that. Bill Burns, as mentioned today, speaking in London, was very circumspect when he was asked about this directly. Okay, so White House is not confirming the Wall Street Journal story on Iran sending ballistic missiles to Russia. So the Wall Street Journal said Iran's already sent them to Russia, and the White House is saying being a bit circumspect, well, not circumspect, being a bit vague. But the NSC, National Security spokesperson, Sean Savert, says, National Security Council, says US is, quote, prepared to deliver significant consequences if true. So if it is true, there'll be significant consequences. But it sounds like those significant consequences are just more, probably going to be more sanctions, where it needs to be much harder sort of okay, you've given them these missiles, we're going to give these missiles to Ukraine and we're going to allow them to use them. But anyway, so Bill Burns said, should Iran ship ballistic missiles, it would be a dramatic escalation. Well, the Wall Street Journal says they freaking have. And Time says, yeah, 200 of them. When asked, but it hasn't, as in, but surely they have already, Burns avoided answering and just repeated his points. So are the US looking for excuses not to be strong on that? Okay, and just in case you're wondering, that big explosion in Voronezh this morning at the ammunition depot and warehouses there was apparently North Korean missiles. So these were supposedly KN-23 missiles from North Korea detonating, and they are still exploding. Like literally as I'm speaking to you now, the latest firm's data says that those bad boys are still causing quite the issue. Anyway, that's enough from me, and my goodness, I've earned myself a cup of tea. These two videos back to back, this amount of talking, this amount of information. I hope it's useful for you. Thank you for sticking by for 45 minutes of military aid, assistance, discussion. My goodness. Take care. Toodle pips.